The number one reason people do not switch their dog to raw food is bacteria, Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria. And if you have looked into raw feeding at all, you have probably seen studies that back this up. What these studies rarely tell you is what they actually measured and what they did not, because the bacteria question is real, but the way it is being framed is not giving you the full picture. I'm going to show you what the research actually says and what your dog's biology was designed to do with bacteria in the first place. I'm Dr. Gunaim. I hold a PhD in veterinary microbiology and immunology, and I have spent my career studying exactly how bacteria interact with the immune system. If you have spent time researching raw feeding, you have probably found two very different camps. One side says raw food is dangerous and irresponsible. They cite studies, they mention bacteria counts. The other side says raw is perfectly safe and the studies are overblown. Neither of these positions is fully useful to you. You are not looking for reassurance. You're looking for clarity. You want to understand the actual biology so you can make a decision you feel confident in. That is exactly what we are going to do today. Let me start with the reframe. The question is not whether raw food contains bacteria. So does every piece of fresh food on the planet, including the chicken you're going to cook for yourself tonight? The real question is, what does your dog's body do with those bacteria? And to answer that, I do not need to give you my opinion. I can show you what the research actually found. The first study I want to walk you through was published in the veterinary record. Swedish researchers tested 50 dogs, 25 raw fed, 25 eating kibble only. They tested 3 bacteria, Salmonella, Campylobacter, and antibiotic-resistant E. coli. Here's the part that almost never gets reported. The kibble-fed dogs also shed bacteria. Campylobacter was found in 16% of them. Antibiotic-resistant E. coli was found in 4% of these dogs. The raw-fed dogs shed more. That is true. But the narrative that kibble is clean and raw is contaminated is not what the data shows. The same bacteria appears in both groups. The rate differs. And critically, none of the dogs in either groups were sick. If you want the full picture on this, what to look for in sourcing, how to handle raw food safely, and what actually matters versus doesn't, I put that together as a free checklist at drgunaim.com. Link is in the description. Now here's the second study, and this one stopped me when I first read it. Researchers at the University of Guelph took 16 dogs and fed them raw food that has been confirmed, intentionally confirmed, to contain salmonella. They knew the food was contaminated before they fed it. More than half of those dogs did not shed a single salmonella organism. Not one dog developed diarrhea. Not one dog showed any clinical signs at all. In the dogs that did shed, it stopped within 1 to 11 days. Read that again. They fed dogs food that they knew was contaminated. All the dogs handled it. Some dogs didn't even shed, and the shedding stopped within a few days. That is not an argument for being careless with food handling. It is evidence of what a healthy dog's biology is capable of. Now, what does the biology tell us about the why? Let me walk you through what actually happens when your dog eats something that contains bacteria. The food enters the stomach and stays there for up to 8 hours. In humans, the stomach starts emptying within 45 minutes. That's not a small difference. It means your dog's food is bathed in acid in stomach way longer than yours. And that acid is not the same acid. A dog's stomach at pH 1, it's 10 times more acidic than a human's at pH 2. pH is a logarithmic scale. Each unit is not a small step, but it's a 10-time fold change. Most bacteria, including Salmonella, cannot survive the combination of an extremely long period in an extremely acidic environment. But suppose some do survive. What they encounter next is a short intestinal tract that moves food far more quickly. A human small intestine is roughly 3 times longer than the dog's. That length exists in humans to maximize nutrient absorption, but it also gives bacteria time and surface area to colonize the gut wall. In dogs, the transit is fast. Bacteria that made it past the stomach do not get that window. This is not one defense. It's a 2-stage gauntlet. Prolonged acid exposure followed by rapid clearance. That architecture did not appear by accident. It evolved alongside a diet of raw prey. Dogs did not evolve eating food that was cooked, extruded, or preserved. They evolved eating prey. That prey came with bacteria. It came with parasites. It came with everything that lives in and on a fresh animal. The biological machinery your dog carries today, the stomach acid, the extended gastric retention, the short intestinal tract, exists precisely because of that evolutionary pressure. The body was not designed to avoid bacteria. It was designed to manage them. That is not philosophy. That's the physiology. Now, does this mean raw feeding has zero risk? No. A dog with a compromised immune system is a different conversation. A puppy is a different conversation. There are nuances. But the blanket claim that bacteria makes raw food dangerous for the average healthy adult dog is not supported by the biology. Here's where I stand. Bacteria in raw food is a real consideration. It is not a reason to dismiss raw feeding entirely. The studies that raised the alarm are measuring shedding, not illness. And they are measuring it in dogs eating raw food while not applying the same scrutiny to kibble, which carries the same bacteria at lower rates. A healthy dog with a healthy gut, fed a properly sourced raw diet, has the biological tools to handle bacteria in food. That is what physiology shows. The risk that is real and worth taking seriously is sourcing and food handling. Where the food comes from matters. How you handle it matters. That is not a raw feeding problem. That is a food safety problem that applies to every meal you prepare. And that is exactly what the checklist I mentioned covers. Here's the one thing I want you to do this week. Go back and look at the next news story you see about raw food and bacteria. Ask one question. Does this story measure shedding? Or does it measure illness? Those are two different things, and conflating them is how a legitimate food safety conversation gets turned into a reason to avoid raw feeding entirely. When you can make that distinction, when you can read a study and separate what it measured from what it concluded, the bacteria question stops feeling like a wall, starts feeling like a known variable you can manage. That is the beginning of making a clear-eyed decision for your dog. The bacteria question always comes back to one thing: where the food comes from and how it is handled. I put together a free raw feeding safety checklist that covers exactly that: sourcing, handling, and preparation. What to look for, what to avoid, and what the evidence actually says. It is at drgunaim.com. The link is in the description. No pressure, no deadline. It is there when you are ready.